Right, you can start the meeting now.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. This is a meeting of the city's capital committee. Today is Tuesday, December 20th, 2022. On the day's agenda, we're continuing our discussions about potential project funding, utilizing some available funds, primarily from the prior year's, half of the prior year surplus, as well as some recommendations that we can give to the comptroller's office for their inevitable general obligation bond financing. And then also coordinating this with other appropriations for capital projects that we've had up to this point through ARPA. And then if you recall from the last meeting, we had a number of items we wanted to follow up on. And a lot of material has been circulated around, but I was going to pull up on my screen some of those items so we can, if we need to talk about them, we can. Let me pull these up here just a second. Okay. Share screen. I can do this without losing you all for a second. Let me see if I can do this right here. What do you see on screen? You currently see the recreation center stuff on screen?
Yes.
You got it? Okay. I believe, Noel, I believe you had asked this question. There were, if you recall from the inventory, there were a number, we talked about pools and boilers, which are on the critical list. There are also a number of items that were on the needed list. So the question was, what's the detail behind those items? And so we got in contact with Recreation, and they sent us a list of items by each rec center for some of those needs. And the first list is HVAC capital needs. And you can see those listings here, starting with 12th and Park, Booter, Cherokee, Gamble, Marquette, Tandy, Wool, and then the YMCA chillers. That's where that $5,965,000, or that approximately $6 million request came from that was on the capital needs inventory. Now that's the HVAC projects. And then there were also some interior projects as well. And similarly, they broke those out by each rec center. And those are itemized in this attachment. And you can go through those and look at them as well. And those add up to a total of almost $8.9 million. And that includes $1.5 million for contingency. In sort of conjunction with that information and detail about what needs are for each rec centers, we'd also ask for some information regarding attendance figures and participation at those rec centers. And that was also provided, at least for the last calendar year, or the projections for the first column represents attendance, this just sheer attendance, or the number of times that could be multiple participants participating multiple times at the same event at a different event at the same rec center. And then the second column is just sheer participant number. So one individual who actually frequents that particular rec center as well. So that just gives you a little bit of context related to those rec center projects. And again, this is in addition to those items which were critically identified related to pools and the boiler system that are currently on our list, partially funded, but still partially needing significant additional funding. Are there any questions on that particular item, or you have what you need for now?
Yeah, I'll jump in, and thanks so much, Paul, for providing this really interesting and important data. First of all, who put it together? Who should I be thanking?
Yeah. It was a Parks Department, mostly Kim Hegley.
Got it. And did presumably facilities services, Rick Ernst or others help out with this, Rich? Or
So they actually help out with the physical work and all those things that you see. But when it comes to the actual reporting, as Paul said, Kim really did all, but yes, we assist them daily with things. Great partnering effort.
great. And then what about Evelyn Rice Peebles, the Recreation Commissioner?
She provided the attendance figures.
Got it. I wonder if it would be possible, because this is really great in terms of a more detailed assessment of the needs, but what I'd still be curious about is if you scroll back up to the needs, Paul, for a moment, like there's so many different needs here, and it's hard for me to tell we labeled the full 9 million as needed, but not critical. And it would be helpful to know if of each of these specific line items, what is most important and what is less critical. And perhaps none of it rises to the level of critical, but it would still be helpful to know, even if none of it does, which of these 9 million are the most needed. Does that make sense? And I feel like that's a determination that probably should be made in consultation with both certainly Kim Hagley and Evelyn Rice Peebles and Rick Ernst.
Rich, I'll defer to you on that one in terms of the how that's allocated each. Although I did note in this list, and I'm a little confused on this one, is that it's got pool piping and electrical replacement. I thought the pool piping was already on the critical list, but I'll let you go ahead and address that, Rich.
Right. So I would say that that's always a good question. And we tell them when they provide us information to provide it, in their priority listing and provide it in red, yellow, green. And so that we can see all these. I can't tell you whether Kim and Evelyn have put, or Rick have put any of these in order from basically looking at them. But I know that these items are things that are all on the list and things that we've talked about. So, we might have to get some more clarification on that if that's what you want to say.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful, because I can understand it if the Capital Committee or the Board of Aldermen are reticent to do a full 9 million in needed, but perhaps if a couple 100,000 of this is really critical, we can address that need.
Yeah, we can look at it and see if there's something on there. Like, for instance, I had that question about the pool piping, because I know, for instance, if a certain pool cannot be operation, that's critical. And that's why I know we got a big number on the critical list for pools. So I'm a little curious about what that is. Is that over and above, or is that some portion of which has already been listed as critical? But yeah,
and kind of along a similar line, one of the reasons why I was so interested in this is because the Recreation Division did reach out to CDA, because we have a small pot of money for some recreation improvements, and flagged that the electrical systems in the Recreational Division needed work, and that sometimes if you're turning off computers or turning on computers and microwaves, you have to turn on one or turn off the other, or that there's some issues with the electrical panels and the wiring there. So I know that may be more critical, but maybe not. And I think ultimately it would just be great to have this list broken out into or prioritized a little bit.
Okay, well, we can get that in. We'll ask them that. I see a couple of hands. Alderwoman Boyd, you joined us. I see your hand raised.
Yes, these are our recreation centers or recreation and community centers.
These are rec centers.
So we have community centers also.
I believe, well, someone else might be best suited to answer this. I have what I think is the answer. I think that they're typically all called recreational centers, but I know that some folks, including I think Commissioner Rice Peebles, prefers to think of them as community centers. And then the two that are a little bit different are the YMCAs, right? In O'Fallon and Carondelet, which were built with public money, but are administered by private entities. And those function also as recreation or community centers.
So we have another building that's under the Rex and Parks and Rec Center, and that's not on here. And when I did talk to Evan Rice people, because I was looking at bringing cameras into our buildings due to the issue that happened at St. Louis Public School, I'm just trying to figure out why that community center wasn't on there and that building is being utilized.
What's the name of the building?
Which building is that? Is
It's the building on Union.
that the West End?
That's
Yeah, the West End Community Center. And when I talked to Evan Rice Peoples, because I was trying to find out how many buildings we need to look at putting cameras in. And I said, well, what do we do with that building? Because it's listed as a city building. She said, our responsibility is the upkeep of the building. So I'm just trying to figure out where would that fit in this dynamic?
Yeah.
So that's probably a really good question for Greg Hayes to address. What I will tell you is, you are correct. It is a city-owned building, and it has been leased through the Demetrius Johnson Foundation to utilize it for his programs there. But to talk about all the specific agreement of who maintains what, that would be a Greg Hayes question.
Okay, all right. And I have talked to Greg about that previously, Rich. And like I said, and I did talk to Evelyn Rice Peoples because I was trying to get figures on how many cameras will be needed for these buildings. And so I do know, I want to say the Gamble Center, the Police Foundation put cameras at that building. But I just think it's what's going on in our city as a whole in regards to crime and for the safety of the children and the staff. You know, I was looking at putting dollars to put cameras up at all those sites because it's, you know, we don't want another issue to happen. So that's why I was asking it. I asked Evelyn Rice people, and she said our responsibility is, as Rich said, it's a city building. And so she said, our responsibility is the electric, the heat, the gas, those things, that's what we're responsible for, the upkeep of that building. So that's why I was asking that question. Thank you. Thank you, Noel, for answering the best that you could.
Yeah, Nancy, you also had your hand up?
So I was going to follow in what Rich Bradley said, that the West End Rec Center is in a different situation than the ones that are listed. And there is also some concern as to how many children and people are actually accessing that site. We've done visits there. We've done a little bit of a pop-up visit and everything. And right now it's on hold since Mr. Johnson has taken ill, but it's a city-owned building. But the number of repairs and things that are needed in that building are astronomical in compared to the other recreation centers. So he has at least for a year, and we can get you a copy of that document, Alderwoman Boyd, for you to take a look at. But that center, I believe, if you saw the numbers that we just showed, we don't have good numbers from that location as to how many people are actually utilizing that center and what they're utilizing it for at this point. It's not the numbers on, it's not staffed by city employees. So it makes it difficult for us to say how many people are using that and what they're using it for.
Right, it's staffed by
Waukegan-
volunteers. It's not, it's no staff over there, it's volunteers.
Right,
And if I'm not mistaken, he did send some numbers in. So if you could send me that information, I would appreciate it, Nancy.
sure.
And
I'll
thank
send
you,
you what
Liz.
we have.
Okay,
Okay. And what I was also going to say is if it makes sense and you would like to hear from, I actually think Joaquina is the person that put most of the numbers together for recreation centers at the direction of Ms. Peebles, but Rice. But you could have Greg come, but a lot of what they're looking for is kind of prioritized in the laundry list that Paul showed earlier. There was an interest by people in doing some work on like the fences you'll see may not all be in exactly the prioritized area, but we've looked at putting newer fences up around the parks that are less threatening around the pools that are less threatening than the ones that are currently there and some of the other things. But we were also looking at this based on whose services are used the most. And like I said at the last meeting, we're trying to figure out more ways to figure out how we utilize them. Like 12th and Park has new basketball court floors. So it's more used right now because there's a lot of basketball that takes place there. Booter has second highest, but it's not someplace that we've had the kind of attendance we would like to have. Cherokee doesn't have a lot of attendance really. People may have come and Gamble was shut down for a while because of police and gang activity there, and that has been cleaned up. But unfortunately, Tandy and Wool are two that we would like to see used more, but there are a lot of people that use those facilities on more than one occasion, but they're on the list to have more, I think, repairs done because they are more utilized on a regular basis and they have more antiquated facilities than some of the other locations. So, but we are trying to do more information about who uses them for what before we make humongous changes to the list of things that we need to have done so that we're actually putting the resources where they need to go.
Okay, anything else on recreation? We'll ask Parks to get together and get some priority listings on that. Keep in mind also that we do also have the boiler and the pool issue already on the list as critical. So that's something else we're gonna have to keep in mind. And for recreation? Great, okay, let's see what else we got. We also had an outstanding request for, tell you what, let's talk about fleet. It was a big item on there. If you recall, we talked about our fleet needs. And one of the questions I had for Chris, and I know Christina, you'd asked for this as well, is could we see a listing of the entire fleet to give us context when we start talking about which ones we want to replace? And so what you also have in your packets today, and I'm going to be pulling it up here, is a summary of the vehicle, the current status of our citywide fleet and what is identified as critical to replace. There also is some items that we've already gotten funded, if not actually replaced at this time. And Chris Amos has put together both a summary collectively by department, collectively by department and vehicle type, and then for each department listing out, if you go through this document, each department's vehicle individually listed, and it will have the expected life, of the vehicle, the year, the model year, whether that based on that expected life, it's over or under its model year or its useful life, the cost of replacement, and then what the cost would be to replace those which are deemed critical. There are also, just for FYI purposes, including identified those items which are already have been funded. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to, I guess, Chris, if you want to lead the committee through what your exhibits tell you.
All right, thank you, Paul. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. Well, the request that I submitted that you had in the packet originally, we looked at last week, basically we have have program area requests for battery and electric vehicles, recharging infrastructure, which has to, of course, be put out there before we implement the electric vehicle plan. And so that's 2,400,000 for the infrastructure and 350,000 for the vehicle incremental cost, which for all those vehicles that were in that study, which you had a copy of that sent to you, that will actually pay for itself over time. But initially, we have to have enough money to buy them, and then the savings will come in operations from fuel and maintenance. We have expended all of the VW Trust grant money that we got a couple of years ago. It took 3 years to get that money. And so what we have in the city now was as a result of a grant. There are no current grants. So either we need to fund all or part of that, or basically the electric vehicle program is stalled from this point forward until there is funding available. The refuse side loader trucks, 2,200,000, that actually comes out of a separate fee. It's part of the capital review process, but it doesn't have to come out of the 41 million you're talking about today. And then I have given a prioritized list of there are 23, almost $24 million worth of total critical vehicles on the list that you're looking at today. But I only hand prioritized a little less than 19 million of it, of the most critical ones that I staffed with the other commissioners to find out what they thought was the most important of what they needed. And so I'm not even asking for the whole amount. And I realize that you might not be able to approve the 19 million either, given the limitations of how many competing interests there are. But basically, if you, whatever number you say you want to approve, we'll draw a line on the prioritized list at that point, and we'll buy everything above that line funded, and we'll push off the rest of it for another year. So,
yeah, Chris, let me pull up yet. I had the entire inventory up. Let me pull up the what the you had as your recommended portion of that.
okay.
So you're saying this is, you're talking about the 18.7 that you'd identified in the
Right. Well, there's also a piece in there for 6 ambulances for fire and 20 detective vehicles that would be hybrid electrics for police. And that police procurement may be altered by the initiative that Comptroller Green has put forward. But the ambulances are still needed. But if things get tight enough, we could maybe buy 3 this next year and then buy the other 3 the year after that. But the problem is you can only put it off for so long because they run the wheels off them 24/7 and they get the equivalent of 400,000 miles on them in 5 years. And so even if we replace an engine for about $30,000 a piece, we still can only get most 10 years, 5 primary and 5 secondary. So right now there are days when there are not enough ambulances on the street because we don't have a reliable first line set and we don't have a reliable back. But there are 8 coming in that you funded last year through the ARPA program. And when those get here, and 2 of them are coming in a couple months, and the other 6 will be another 18 months before they get here.
Hey, Chris?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was gonna jump in real quick. Because what I pulled up was the summary of the critical vehicles separate from police and fire. So right now you're talking specifically category, the fire category related to ambulances, right?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Okay,
sir.
well, let me get back to that point because I want to make sure I'm following what you're talking.
I'm sorry.
about. That's all right. Okay, all right. And you're talking about the 6 ambulances estimated at $2.6 million.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that's what we've got on screen now. Okay.
So I'd say that in order to augment the 8 that are already on the way, we really need to fund 3 of those or we're going to lose in the next 2 years, we would lose so many spares, we wouldn't be able to keep but maybe 10 on the road a day instead of the 12 to 13 that's needed. And we've been down as few as 8 on the road because of the delay in getting the 8 that are coming in now. So we have to do something with the ambulances, or we have to accept that we can't run 12 to 13 a day. That's the reality of the situation. All right, you want to slide down to police?
Sure.
Okay, we were able to fund half of the request through ARPA money, which took care of almost all of the scout vehicles, the marked Tahoes that I would call patrol vehicles, but the police department calls them scout vehicles. And so a lot of what was left that needed to be done was the sedan replacements, which would have to be done with a pursuit rated SUV, unless the policy changes in the police department that says they don't have to be pursuit related. So they are considering non-pursuit related vehicles. I know that Nancy got a position paper on that she distributed, and I read it. And so it might not be that expensive if we don't buy hybrids and we don't buy pursuit rated hybrids, but we still need to buy some detective cars.
Okay. Yeah, Chris, yeah, just for everyone's information, within their packet today, and I've got that also posted, was the current, because that was one of our follow-up items from last week's meeting. What's the current guidelines on police vehicles, detective vehicles? So I had contacted Dr. Isom, and he got in touch with the police department. So this is there's a write-up on that. You can read that at your leisure here, but that sort of describes what that the pursuit related vehicle offering that they policy that they had. But obviously that's not written in stone. So anything that we want to consider in terms of funding purposes, that we'll have to look at that. And I think as Chris just mentioned, Nancy has more information on that. Okay, go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
All right, now I'm ready to hit the 18 million list, which was the last thing on my list.
All right.
So again, 29 million is needed in the critical category based upon the age of the vehicles, our ability to keep them running, and the mission that they're accomplishing. And so I hand prioritize the top 18, and that's what's represented by the summary that you see before you. And all these vehicles are on the vehicle by vehicle list that you received for the meeting today, as well as the summary sheets. So for instance, if you wanted to see how many trades vans 220 Parks needs, what unit numbers those are, and how old they are, then you could look at the vehicle listing of it, or you could just ask me and I'll tell you. And so the full disclosure on this is that, 18 million doesn't even come close, but the resources I understand are limited. So I'm just telling you what it would take to keep from having an operational problems if we don't replace vehicles. And I put them in priority order so that the most critical are first. And if we don't draw the line someplace middle or close to this 18 million, then there are actually going to be some operational impacts because the departments can't run many of their operations without reliable vehicles to do so. That's all I had to say. Be happy to answer questions.
Yeah, Chris, I have a real quick one. You mentioned priority order. The list I'm looking from the need is in department order. So is there a separate, is that 18 million divvied up separately somewhere else on that detail?
Yeah, the spreadsheet that I sent you.
Okay, this spreadsheet has them that way.
Yeah, the spreadsheet that I sent with that summary
Okay.
is the one that has the normal priority list 1 through 400 or whatever it is, that has the per unit information, and it is ranked top to bottom. And so whenever the committee decides how much they want to fund, I can draw the line. I can provide you the full list of what's funded, what's not funded.
Okay. So, but that $18 million list that you had, that's the first, if I go to that sheet, which I'll send out to the committee, it'll be the same vehicles. It'll just be prioritized. Is that correct?
That's correct. That
Okay.
18 million is part of what you see on these reports. It is only 18 of the 29 million. And those are the ones I hand prioritized because I wanted to make the vehicles that were most important above the funding line wherever that gets drawn. And that was not just my opinion, but also the opinion of the commissioners who operate these vehicles.
All right. All right, I see a couple hands. Nancy?
Sorry, I have two things. One is just so people don't worry as much in the meantime, in the interim, while we have, we're trying to get more ambulances. We have a contract with Abbott to make sure that we have coverage in the city. So I don't want people to think that there aren't ambulances in the city while we're waiting for these to come. Secondly, Chris, there was an order. I'm not going to probably get the name of it correctly, but there is an item that the forestry department that was looking for, a special kind of truck. I think it's a vehicle that is about $700,000 it costs. It sounds like that's a lot to people. But when they were in conversations, that particular item would take the place of 5 workers, which we are heavily short of workers. And I don't see anything listed that looks like that new vehicle that they were trying to get. And Paul, you might remember because you were in that meeting. I don't remember what it's called.
No, good point. Basically what it is, I've talked to Alan about that. I have a plan to deal with it. And so I didn't forget it. It's just
What is the plan?
The plan is that there are 3 aerial trucks that cost about $160,000 a piece on this list, 18 million list. And so Alan said that it will replace 5 people, like you said, plus existing trucks. The existing trucks have a bucket that extends 70 feet in the air and holds a forester up there with a chainsaw, and that's how they cut limbs. The new truck is something used by logging companies, and it would be a lift that has an automatic saw, a chainsaw basically on the end of it. And so from the ground, the staff member uses it to cut the trees down. So Alan couldn't give me the specifications. We didn't know how much it was going to cost for sure. You're right. He said 700,000 was approximate. And so our agreement was that, okay, whatever gets funded of forestry, if that's what you want most to cut your staffing problems, then we'll replace whatever forestry gets on this list, especially the aerial trucks, with that saw truck. We still don't have a budget quote for it, so we don't know exactly what it is, but we're expecting a demo. And so if the funding gets approved for the forestry equipment, then that saw would be the first thing we purchase, that saw truck. And so approving the list the way it is with the funding the way it is still gets that truck.
Yeah, but that doesn't give me correct information because you then are going to move stuff around for other items that we needed. And this was an additional item, not to be a takeaway from others. So we'll try to get you that exact amount as to what that will cost, because most people sitting on this call are going to think that I'm going to get all of these forestry, hypothetically, all of these forestry items and park items are going to be purchased. And then later down the road, somebody could be looking for a out front mower and find out, oh no, we turned that in and we didn't get that. We put a couple other things together and replaced them with this other vehicle, but that's not what was supposed to happen with this particular item. It's supposed to be an add to their list, not we'll take something else out later on down the road. That is a necessary item that they've requested. And so it should have been, and I'll go back and talk to Alan and Greg, but that should have been on the list of something that is needed to happen, not going to be a swap out later. And then we don't get the other equipment that we need on top of that.
I understand. And the issue was that this list was developed with the commissioners and submitted back in late August before the issue about the truck came up. So we could solve the problem easily by saying that whatever funding you approve, you want the first forestry truck on top of that as being the first item in the funded list. And then as soon as I get the exact number, we'll know what that's going to be and it'll come out of funding. So the result will be, if you want that and all the other forestry equipment instead of trade-offs, then whatever is on the end of the list, dump trucks for snow or refuse trucks or parks vehicles or tractors or whatever, that will get pushed down the list by 700,000, and therefore those things won't get funded. I'm sorry, I can't hear you, ma'am.
Sorry, I was on mute. And what I'm telling you is that that's not an either or. This was an addition to the other items. I realize it came afterwards, but it came after a number and series of meetings with the department and the administration about things that needed to change. It didn't mean other things should be taken off and replace it. So I will have to go back and have the conversation, but at no way are we looking to have any of the items that you just listed put on a back burner, because as you said at the beginning, Chris, all of these items are necessary in order to run the operations of the city.
Absolutely.
And it's problematic. There are other things that we're looking at that maybe should be looked at differently, but at this particular time, all of the items that we're asking for are traditionally many times pushed down the list, and it's problematic for us in order to get the services to the residents in a way that makes sense. So I will speak with the commissioner and then we will come back with you on this and get the correct information. But at no time was the position of the operations and the administration that this would mean other items would come off the list, because they're all needed. They've been needed for many years. So
Okay.
thank you for your time.
There's one other item like that that's on this list, and that is the issue of the 18 small street department snowplow vehicles. If we want to do that neighborhood plowing, then those are also not on this list. The big ones are on this list.
The 18 for the streets are in Board Bill 120, we hope.
Oh,
If Board
great.
Bill 120 was to get passed, that I believe has the monies in it for the line item, covers some of that street having smaller vehicles that can go down residential streets.
Terrific. I was not informed there were any vehicles in any bill.
Well, that bill just got passed and we left it open. We're not putting exact type of trucks because it takes a long time to get passed. And then we have a problem where you can't get as many trucks as you think with a certain amount of money, because that certain amount of money is higher and we have to follow ARPA the way that the board bill is passed. So
Okay,
there is
well-
money in that there is a line item for plowing residential streets in Board Bill 120.
Terrific. Well, I will certainly add the forestry truck to the itemized list. Where do you want it in the priority? You want it up front where it's guaranteed to get funded, or do you want it down where the current tree trucks are on the list and
No,
may
we
or may not
wanted
get
it, we
funded?
want it up front, but I will come back to the group after I talk to the commissioner to make sure that he knows what we're trying to do too, since
Well, I think he's
that was
clear
what
on
he
it.
was supposed to do.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Hey, Rich, I see your hands up.
Yeah, so I want to go to the topic of police vehicles for a minute. I know there is an outstanding request, a program from the comptroller, and I just want to ask Chris to give us, the committee, some details on what we currently have and make sure everybody is clear on this. So, Chris, I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I'd like you just to answer them. So, obviously, if we're going to buy 100 police vehicles to go in neighborhoods, they're going to be marked vehicles. Is that a correct statement?
That's what Latanya's proposal says. Yes, sir.
Okay. And so we bought 3.420 million from Board Bill 184. And those are all marked vehicles, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so how many current marked vehicles, scout police vehicles are in the fleet today?
I'd have to look at the exact number, but I think it's about 350.
Okay, and out of that 350, how many of those go home currently and are parked in neighborhoods?
I don't know of any of those marked cars that go home parked in neighborhoods at this point, at least not. They were not even listed on the last time the police submitted their take home list, which was 2 years ago. So if they put some in take home roll since then, I wouldn't know about it.
Okay, and are you aware if there's any take-home vehicles, and I'm gonna say marked, because again, I'm not concerned about command vehicles or whatever. Are there any marked vehicles that go home currently outside the city?
The only marked vehicles that go outside the city and home are the K9 units where the dog officer goes home with the person officer. The other ones that go out that like SWAT and those type of vehicles are not marked.
All right, and that's all I wanted to do was just paint a clear picture of the background so everybody knows the details to make an informed decision. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and thank you, Rich. I did want to point out when we start talking about the rolling stock and equipment in terms of what the cutoff is. Chris's list currently adds up to 18. Remember, we're only talking 27 and a half for the surplus part of our capital, which is everything. So there's going to be a cutoff somewhere. So that's the challenge we get when we start doing capital, is that our list of needs far exceeds our resources. And so it's a matter of prioritizing where we want to, what limit we're going to have on each category that we're going to be in. And so that's why it makes it so difficult. Just as while we're on vehicles, I think that might be a nice segue. Latanya, did you want to discuss your letter regarding the take-home vehicles?
First, I would like to say, Rich, thank you very much for that information that you just provided. And in addition to what Rich just stated, that gives additional clarity of why vehicles are needed for the comptroller's request. And the comptroller's request still remain at 100 cars, and the approximate or estimate per car is $54,000. So the request remains at approximately $5.4 million.
Any questions on that?
Yes.
Yeah.
How, we have this letter that says that there are going to be 100 cars. What are we doing with these cars?
Those 100 cars are going to be take-home cars to assist in the comptroller's public safety initiative, having a car or a police vehicle presence on city blocks.
So trying to think how some of this is comes into the bargaining of the collective bargaining agreement with the police officers. And one of the questions I would have is, how are you is the personnel department going to set up and the police department together going to work out the rules and regulations as to how these cars are going to be, if there's an agreement to take cars home and utilize that, or like, how is that going to happen?
And Nancy, I don't have the answer for that question
Okay.
at this time.
I'll talk to the comptroller. That's fine.
Nancy,
Alderwoman Boyd, yeah, you have your hand up.
Nancy, I did talk to the comptroller in regards to that, and her and I are in agreement to amend the resolution to go with that pay bill. But it will be years of service on the job. It wouldn't be for no new recruits that would come in. That's not what we're trying to do. But we are adamant that they have to live in the city to take those cars home. And so it's the concept of cops on the block. That's the comptroller's concept about that.
Mhm.
I hope I answered.
Thanks, Pam.
You're welcome, sweetie.
And so there is a city vehicle policy that is out there, which I'm sure everybody's aware of. And it generally applies to city fleet vehicles as well as fire vehicles. Chris, does that policy in any way talk about the operation and use of take-home police vehicles?
It doesn't specifically cover police vehicles. What it says about take-home vehicles, it is the determination of the appointing authority, so the director and the commissioner of police, to determine how many vehicles go home, of what types, and where they're allowed to go, as far as the E&A policy is concerned. And beyond that, it's generally reviewed by the mayor's office, which has been delegated in the past to the director of operations, to confirm those selections by the appointing authority. That has happened periodically since the policy was put into place in 2002. But the last time that policy was updated was in 2010. And so if there's any operational changes that require changes to the policy, then we need to put together a new draft and put that before E&A to make official.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions about this one in particular? All right, I think that's the end of our homework that we had from the last time in terms of following up on some of the requests you had. Seems like we need to get a little bit more detail on the recreation centers, get some prioritization on those projects. I did also want to talk about, and Nancy, you brought up Board Bill 120. Let me see if I can bring that up. I got it here. Because there is on our capital needs inventory, there's some overlap between the two, and I want to make sure that where we go in terms of any recommendations on our list doesn't get double counted or is already accounted for in Board Bill 120. So I don't know if you wanted to identify, or should I just, Rich, did you want to talk about some of these Board of Public Service projects?
Yes, I'll start at the top of the list and then I can hand it off to probably Nancy after the BPS subtotal 55 million. So Board Bill 120, the idea is there was an infrastructure board bill utilizing ARPA funds, and to a few of the items in here build on some projects that were previously approved in Board Bill 184 and the original ARPA funding through capital. So for example, the first one, which is the design and implementation of traffic calming and roadway improvements based on completed traffic studies. Alderwoman Boyd and I discussed in the last meeting that, and she asked a great question about what is a shovel-ready project. And so a study is like a 20%, 15 to 20% conceptual design where it gives options before you actually proceed into engineering design. And so a study is not a shovel-ready project. A shovel-ready project is a project where the plans and specifications have been completed by a licensed professional engineer. They're signed and sealed, and they are ready to go out to bid and ready for construction. And so the first item, there are a number of corridors in the city that many of the alderpersons have funded, and the studies are complete. And I believe there are 5 of them to be actual with you. And the plan here would be is $12 million to actually take those 5 corridors and to perform the engineering design and put those also in conjunction with some other projects that had started previously. And let me talk about that a little bit. So traffic calming wise, we do not have a set of real design standards for traffic calming in the city. We have what I will refer to as a toolbox of items that we have utilized for different situations. So the problem that creates is that as you pass on a corridor from one area to another, one ward to another, sometimes you see different features, which actually is relatively confusing to pedestrians and drivers, and sometimes can lead to accidents and other things of that nature. So part of that first project, as well as part of the second project, is to develop an actual set of standards whereby we have common traffic calming standards across the city that you always see when you're driving. There may be a couple variations of it, but it won't change from ward to ward simply because, we did it as an a la carte project. So the second project was additional funding to address ADA and traffic calming improvements with 5 corridors identified in Board Bill 184. So in the Streets Committee, I had a conversation with them about this. And so this funding through this ordinance was approved in May of last year. The street department was supposed to pave these 5 corridors because their milling and paving equipment was at a vendor until early September. There was no paving work that was done over the summer. We were waiting to do that work. In conjunction with that, there was this conversation of, while we're going to pave, we can look at this in a holistic approach, and we can add traffic calming features, striping, additional ADA items to these corridors so that we don't come in and pave and 6 or 8 or 10 months later, tear them back up again to do other things. Because obviously we all know that when we do things like that, or anybody does, we all get pretty well beat up. So we have employed 3 consulting engineers to look at those 5 corridors from Board Bill 184. Assuming this passes, it will combine the funding for the paving in this, and we will do those in a holistic manner. The next item that is on the list is, let's see, Greenway North Grand Corridor Improvements. So what this is Great Rivers Greenway, North Grand, Cass Spring, pedestrian improvements associated with the Brickline Greenway. And so there was a shortfall of about $12 million in GRG's project to build infrastructure on the opposite side of the street from the Greenway. So if you will, they were going to build a Greenway down one side of the street and not finish the paving or the sidewalks or other things, ADA improvements on the other side, because it was not in their project. So they asked the city to work with them. And so this $2 million would represent the local match share for an STPS and a CMAQ grant, where we would apply to do the city side improvements and get those corridors completed so they're not halfway done. The next item on the list, the public safety answering point, the PSAP building, which is the 911, EMS, fire, police, SEMA, the emergency EOC, the emergency operations center, which would be at Jefferson and Cass, 17,000 square foot facility, estimated at about $42 million today. And we currently have a little over $5 million that we are working on the design for that. So this $15 million, again, if it were approved, would give us about half of the funding that we would need for that facility. And, meeting with our federal lobbyist and working with, Nancy and other folks around town, I will tell you, the one thing that frustrates me greatly is you can get grants for helicopters, submarines, tanks, any kind of things that you really don't need, but you can't get them for police vehicles, ambulances, fire trucks, or a PSAP 911 facility, which to me would be something that should be up front and center. And so we have been scouring, looking for grant opportunities to fund the other $20 million. We don't have anything yet, but we are applying for any opportunity that would come forward. And I think the last thing on that list, there's 2. Okay. The next item is safety improvements at the top 10 crash intersection locations And so this, again, is hand in hand with the traffic calming that we're all talking about. I think everyone on this call is very familiar with, traffic speeding and traffic calming needs and accidents and fatalities and all those things. And so the idea here is to fund improvements in conjunction with the standards that we design above for the top 10 crash intersections in the city. And those consultants I mentioned before would also be working on those designs in conjunction with the standards and the things we're going to do in those other corridors. And then certainly last but not least is the street paving for arterials. If you will, in the red, yellow, green sheet, there's about $14 million in there for arterial street paving. This number would be a portion of that. So if this were to pass, then that $14 million would be reduced by $8 million. And we would be looking at funding the remaining $6 million. So that in total are the BPS projects that were in that infrastructure board bill for $55 million. And I will hand it off to Nancy.
Hey, Rich, before you go on, so if I look at that list specifically, the 15 for the PSAP, the 8 for the arterials. Are there any other? I'm trying to think of things, dollar amounts that would, if they're funded here, would come off of our list over here on your list.
So in my category of that I just talked about, those are the only two items. But we'll, Nancy can point out the ones below that may do that too.
Okay, Pam, I see Alderwoman Boyd has raised her hand, so go ahead, Pam.
I just have a question. Rich would say the street paving for arterials. My question is, I'm trying to figure out how to ask it. The street paving, I know all the people put in dollars for street paving. So is this as an addition to, or is it that we don't have to use our money for the street paving?
So my understanding of that, Alderwoman, is that this is in addition to, because I believe what you guys typically do with your ward capital is pave the side streets and pave other streets. These are the major arterial corridors in the city. And so I believe this would be in addition to.
Okay, and then the other thing is the design and implement traffic calming and roadway improvements. So, and Rich, I'm keep beating on this horse. So if somebody has a project and you said shovel ready, they already did a traffic study, correct?
Yes, the traffic
Okay.
study is phase 1, and it's about 15% of the design conceptual. Then you
Okay.
go to engineering design. When that's done, it is shovel ready.
Okay, thank you so much, Rich.
Yes, ma'am.
And I see Alderman Cone has joined and he has his hand raised.
Thank you, Paul. I just want to kind of piggyback off of what my colleague from the 27th ward was just talking about. Rich, when you say the main arterials, what exactly which arterials are those? Is that Grand? Because like Grand runs north and south, and is it like a certain part of Grand, or?
So
like,
I can read you the definitions from Board Bill 184 and from the floor substitute of the 5 corridors. 1 is Union Enright to Florissant. 2 is Grand, Holly Hills to Hall. 3, Kings Highway, Gravois to Florissant. 4, Jefferson Chippewa to Shoto. And 5, Goodfellow, Delmar to McLaren or Halls Ferry, whichever you described it as. Those are
okay, and I see. Oh, sorry.
You're right.
So if I recall correctly, what I'm looking at, it's about $8 million for the paving of arterial streets. Do we know for sure that that's what that's going to end up costing? Like, was that an estimate that was provided from the streets department, or where did that 8 million number come from? Because I know just a few years ago, when I repaved Grand from, I think it was, Chippewa to Delore, I had to do it in 2 different sections because it was about $400,000 just for, my ward. So I broke it out into 2 to do, 200,000 on the north end, 200,000 on the south end. I mean, that was probably 5 or 6 years ago now, and it needs repaving already, but it just seems like a low number if we're doing these major arterials.
So those numbers were provided to us from the street department, the street commissioner and the street director. And I would just ask you to keep in mind, I agree with you. And asphalt, as gasoline has skyrocketed, and as asphalt is a petroleum product, asphalt is about $91 a ton right now. So those numbers were put together about a year and 2 or 3 months ago. So, an estimate is exactly what it is. It's a snapshot of what the cost is at that time. But the one thing that you got to kind of remember is when the street department paves for us, all we pay for in capital is the material because the labor is included. And that's why we always do that. Now, that paving is a simple mill and overlay. It is not a reconstruction by any stretch of the imagination. It is not curbs. It is not anything. And so that's why that item in Board Bill 120 is critical. Those items are critical to do those corridors properly.
So that also kind of leads me to my next comment, which I posted in the chat, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone's on the same page here. So Board Bill 120, Rich, can you just confirm where that is legislatively?
Can I confirm that? I cannot.
Well, so last I checked, it's still sitting in the HUD committee. So that and part of the reason I'm bringing that up is there's a lot that can happen in committee, right? All of these things can change through amendments in committee. So for planning purposes for the capital committee, I'm a little concerned, frustrated, apprehensive of voting on anything based off of what might be contained in a board bill that hasn't even passed out of committee. Board bills that have passed out of committee, there's not as much likelihood that they would change. There's still the possibility that it could, but the likelihood of it changing is not as great. But certainly when a board bill is still sitting in committee and hasn't passed out, there's a great potential for amendments. And so I would be very apprehensive about using these monies as kind of allocated as they are, because they haven't been as of now. So I certainly appreciate the overview and going through it. I'm on HUD. I believe my colleague from the 27th is also on HUD now. So, I think that we'll be having that discussion certainly in the new year, but I feel like there's so many priorities that we have in our capital expenditures right now. Certainly this will help alleviate some of those concerns, but until it's passed, I don't think it should be taken as the gospel, for what it's worth.
No, thank you, Alderman Cohn. That was sort of my purpose in bringing this up, only simply because I wanted to make sure that we're aware of what's out there and being proposed, so that we're in one way or another, we don't end up double counting something. And with that known caveat that we don't have a final bill yet passed with regard to Board Bill 120, I did want to get a sense of what it is that's being proposed, so that we know when we're considering the subsequent capital appropriation, what is possible and what, because it's about trying to fit priorities in, as and we had that earlier discussion about vehicles, talking about $18 million. Well, our whole pot is only 27 and a half in terms of the strictly capital. So yeah, I just want to make sure everyone's aware of that. So yeah, no, that is a point well taken.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that, Paul. And thank you, Rich, for the answers as well.
And I see Noel has his hand raised.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks for that important clarification, Alderman Cohn. Just continuing to kind of look through Board Bill 120 and the capital needs inventory to assess overlap. A couple questions for you, Rich. We've talked about how the 8 million in arterial street paving and the $15 million for the PSAP, those are both in the capital needs inventory. The funding for designing and implementing traffic calming and roadway improvements, does that include the $2 million in the capital needs inventory for signal timing?
It does not.
It does not. Okay. And then similarly, I know we passed $2 million for ADA transition plan implementation. Know that ultimately costs tens of millions of dollars, but wondering if that covers line item number 10 in the capital needs inventory for ADA transition plan implementation.
It does not, and I'll expound on that one a little bit. So the ADA transition plan highlighted specific areas around the city where ADA improvements were needed. And these corridors were not included in the top priority for that. But again, as I mentioned, if we were going to go in and pave those streets and do any kind of other work there, it's incumbent on us to do it all at the same time. Now, Alderman Cohen's point is spot on, that if it doesn't get approved from the Board of Aldermen, then we will simply go back to the Board Bill 184, paving of those streets, simple mill and pave, and that's what will happen there. But yeah, the ADA transition plan is not, that 2 million in there is not included in any of these items.
Got it. Thank you. And last one, similar type question. There is line item number 4 in the capital needs inventory is about traffic management enhancement, phase 5, Clarabelle, Euclid, Walton, Taylor, Newstead, Pendleton, and Sarah. And similarly, line item, I think it's 26 is Louisiana street calming. Are either of those two, could either of those two be funded under the $14.5 million allocated to address ADA and traffic calming improvements?
No.
Because of the 5 corridors.
Right, the 5 corridors identified in Board Bill 184 that I just went over, right?
All right, thanks. And then
Yes, sir.
one other question, a little bit bigger picture. What is the data regarding fatalities, regarding traffic flow that we look at as we try to assess where these dollars can have the most impact?
So I would say that, you know, and I am not a traffic engineer per se, and that's why we've employed them. But obviously what we're going to look at is pedestrian and vehicular fatalities. And I think, again, everyone on this call has read about those type of things. And so they're going to be looking at major, the major intersections around the city with all the data reported from the police department and the street department in conjunction with the traffic engineering firms to determine what are the best candidates for that. And we do know what those are. I don't have them in front of me at the moment, but we can tell you pretty quickly what the top 10 or 15 or 20 intersections are. There is data on that is kept.
Great, thank you. Last final thought. I know that last time we passed, I think it was Board Bill 184, which has been referenced. That included both ARPA and capital funding. And I wonder if something that might both give us a tiny bit more time and the aldermen a tiny bit more time is if this committee were to recommend, say, it's 100 million in top priority needs, the alderman could then take that 100 million and allow it to inform a committee sub or an updated board bill that appropriated both these ARPA funds and the $27 million capital surplus. But that's just really something I thought for the alderman to let us know if that makes sense at all, but also for this committee to think about what its recommendation is.
Well, yeah, if it were this committee, then it would be starting pretty much from scratch, because I wouldn't want to take Board Bill 120 as it exists and then sort of take it as a fait accompli and then say, hey, in addition, we put something else. But
right.
Yeah, one of the things that jumped out at me, we have been trying to map things, particularly it's helpful when you're talking about capital projects, where these things are occurring. So we have the ability to put that on a map. And I know on our capital needs inventory, we can do that. I'm not so sure how much of specificity we have with locations on some of these other items, but if you get those, Rich, eventually we'd have to, assuming Board Bill 120 goes as it is there, we could put that information on, because this is capital stuff. So we'd have to, I would like to be able to assess where all these things are, and so we could have it in one big map, if you will.
Not a problem.
Okay, Nancy.
I may actually be able to speak to this one since it's at CDA. And
Go right ahead. Go right ahead.
Thanks, Nancy. So the Digital Equity Fund is something that has grown out of, first of all, the Community Foundation and Ernst & Young did a really robust analysis of the digital divide in the St. Louis region, finding that there are 3 essential barriers to accessing the internet. The first being coverage, actual broadband and Wi-Fi coverage. The second being affordability, where there is coverage, but it's not affordable, or also devices being unaffordable. And so computers, tablets, phones, etc. And then the third kind of barrier to accessing the internet was digital literacy. The individuals might have coverage, might be able to afford the coverage, but still don't actually know how to navigate the internet. And so this Digital Equity Fund will allow us to invest in interventions designed to address each of these challenges. Not frankly, the next step, and one that was already funded in Ordinance 71393, is a analysis of the city's fiber network, because as well as a deeper analysis of what some of these interventions could be, because the only real way we can make a dent in the coverage piece of this would be a pretty sizable investment with significant match, federal and state match, and that's going to require us to have a really clear understanding of what the capacities of the city fiber system are. We obviously have a sewer network, water network, streets network. We also have a fiber network that goes under city streets and arterials, and just assessing exactly what its capacity is and how much we could build off of it. But that study is currently underway, and as it concludes, we may use this Digital Equity Fund to match federal dollars for an investment to expand coverage, or we may deploy it in a kind of in a less ambitious, but ultimately for the amount of money, possibly more impactful way to really address the affordability and digital literacy barriers. But it's a flexible pot that we plan to allocate according to where we can make the biggest impact. And the person leading it is really Simon Huang, the city's chief technology officer. It's just being housed and administered through CDA.
Okay. Want to keep working down the list, Nancy?
Yes, the next one is for public safety. It's the CAD, which is actually the computer aided dispatch, which would help with the 911. It's the new software that we need as we move forward. It's something that we would begin to use as soon as it was available. And we all know that we have had issues over the period of time, but this would allow us to dispatch in a different way, but it would bring the technology up to the 20th and 21st century as to what kind of software we use, how we can respond, and the best way to utilize that going forward. It's a combination to help, hopefully, eventually, as the PSAP comes on board, we would also be getting the call taking and dispatching services done with updated software that enhances our ability to provide services for respondents and citizens at this point. The workplace modernization and enhancement. Many people may have heard that we are in the process of moving a lot of the paper systems in the city to technological systems, where we would be putting into place different technologies that will help us with the services that we employ people may not be aware of the fact that many of our records are all kept on paper rather than computerized, or there's a number of different systems that people have, but it doesn't necessarily mean that all our different software systems can talk to each other in a way that works. And what this does is this provides us with the ability to upgrade the workplace. So for example, hardware and investments in software and applications to upgrade the processes that we use to be more digital and efficient, and some laptops to video conferencing and hotspots, and equipping staff with appropriate equipment, which would enhance their staff performance. And by investing in the software and services, we leverage established solutions to gather the right data to improve decisions and replace manual and paper-based processes with more effective ones. We're getting ready to launch. We've done the financial department, but we're also getting ready to launch the way that people sign in with time cards, which will become electronic, the way people process the payroll, and everything will all become much more electronically friendly going forward. And as a result, we want to make sure that other areas that haven't been as 21st century become 21st century, which make the user from the citizen's perspective, as well as the user in the office, be able to work better and get better answers than before. It doesn't include personnel or hiring improvements. It's more, that's part of the ERP citywide transition I've already talked about. We have some like making video conferencing room upgrades, because it looks like at some point we will still have video conferencing going forward at some level similar to today. Adding software and services for data analytics and dashboards like the ARPA survey and things of that nature. And coming forward, maybe potentially digital signatures and document management to route contracts and paperwork electronically. And we're going to try a pilot with that. The reality is that for E&A, for example, 5 paper copies of every contract that is going to be approved before E&A comes through our office and goes through the whole process. And that's just not the best way to handle that. And we're also adding Telemi, which is a subscription service to help us with DHS and the buildings by putting the public data together and cross-referencing with eviction metrics and landlord data as to where we have vacancies and where we may have opportunities for housing people in a different way than we have before. And then it's just an overall upgrading most of the systems that people may have had interaction with the Citizen Service Bureau, which is only can really talk to itself. So we are now trying to expand all of these programs so that they will be interactive and more bring the city to a different level of ability for customer, which is the residents' use, rather than the way that they've done things in the past. The Parks Recreation is for improvements in Hyde Park that we think that are necessary to bring that up. And I think it's potentially putting some type of more children-oriented equipment and things in that park going forward so that there's more for people to do. Mobility and transportation master plan is to look at the traffic calming. I think that's what we call it, because it's not just traffic calming, it's looking at all forms of mobility and transportation in order to figure out what's the best route to have, like should there be bikes here? What kind of sidewalks do we have? Do we have the right crosswalks and things of that nature? So it's not just about calming traffic, it's all these things that add into it that make this a more mobile friendly city and more safe city for pedestrians and whatever kind of mobility that you're using. The plowing residential streets, we've asked for money to see about the possibility. There has never really been in the city's plan a systematic approach to plowing residential streets. Different alder people have sometimes paid for it themselves out of monies that they had or monies that they raised. Many of the trucks that we use for plowing are too large to go down residential streets without causing huge problems to people's cars that are parked on the sides of the street. So this is an opportunity for us to get some more trucks that would be more amenable to being able to go down side streets and plow them as well if we were to get a large storm. The
So Nancy,
refuse,
go ahead. I was gonna ask you. So that one in particular is for trucks?
I think it will also include people because we'd have to have people. Let me see where, it might include some people at it too, because we probably have to have a foreman or somebody to do that. But the goal is to have a program where, if possible, we could do this internally. But we had, we'll see how it goes. But ideally, we want to see if this makes sense and actually works for people. But some of it is for trucks. Some of it is, we'll see what the other cost would be. It might be that we need more salt or more other snow-related items to make that happen.
The reason why I bring it up, because I remember this is ARPA, so when you start
Right.
talking about people, it might be a little.
Well, no. It's not a staffing thing as much.
Okay.
It's more like right now, our guys drive the humongous trucks. You can't put those down a lot of the side streets. But they could drive a smaller truck and do some residential streets once they're done with the bigger arterial roads.
Okay.
So on the refuse is a pilot project. We have 80% of the trash is collected in alley dumpsters and 20% is in roll carts. And this would allow us the opportunity to test and see if there were neighborhoods and or routes that we currently have now. Sometimes routes go across the ward, so we're not looking at it on a ward by ward basis, but we're looking at trying to have see if there's a couple companies and people that would like to try having a roll cart rather than a alleyway dumpster in their yard, and how we would be able to use that for both recycling and trash and probably yard waste as well. But we'd have to look at how that went. But we put money in to have a pilot project to see if that's a more efficient way to pick up trash and refuse going forward. So that's what that money is towards. And then sidewalk program, this is to try to deplete the backlog of the 50/50 sidewalk program that has been in place for a long time, but is there are a number of, it kind of was a program in place that then stalled, and we estimate based on the cost that it would take us back from 2017 forward to backfill all of the sidewalk improvements that have been listed and had not been being fulfilled prior to this administration. And actually, since we came in, there's been additions, but the majority of them come from pre-2021 of us trying to get those areas fixed for people. Some people had given money towards getting that done. Most people had not, but they had submitted to have their sidewalks repaired, and that work has not been done. We now have a staff person who runs that section of the streets department, and he's looking at the amount of 50/50 sidewalks that are in place, and they estimate based on the cost of those that that's what it would cost to fix those sidewalks.
Okay, thank you, Nancy.
Mhm.
I see Pam, Alderwoman Boyd, do you have a question?
Yeah, Nancy was moving so fast. I was trying to get her, but she took the whole show. So I was like, okay, let me dissect what she was saying. So on the information technology services, that's the internet services for the city. That's what we're talking about, right?
The digital equity fund that Noel referred to is for city residents, et cetera. The workplace modernization and enhancements is for internal city work.
Okay, so this is just my suggestion. I don't know about anybody else, because the city is so far behind, and we're such in the caveman mindset of how our city is ran. Nancy, do you all think that's enough for that to get us where we need to be?
Well, this doesn't include the millions of dollars that have been spent already to put the majority of the programming that we need to do, which is the payroll, the finance and the timesheets, those are all through a different service that we've already paid for, budgeted and paid for. This is to upgrade the equipment that people have. And Simon, as Noel referred to, is very good and on top of this and thinks that this will cover what we need to cover going forward, and additional software. They have calculated out some of it, like the software for DHS. They have calculated out what the cost would be for that and some of the other programs. So I think he's pretty close to what he thinks he needs to move forward.
So does STL TV, are they included in upgrading? In this
think
project?
Not in this project unless they need new computers, but Rich, I think we did put money into SLTV earlier, and I think, Paul, maybe we gave them more money in their budget last year, if I remember correctly, for some of the upgrades that they're looking for.
Okay, and then the high part, and so I'm kind of confused because we just looked at something with Parks and Recs and Forestry, and then I heard you say that this was to bring equipment in, playground equipment or whatever, into that part. And so if I'm off, tell me, because like in my parts, I pay for that out of my out of half-cent tax. I might be saying it wrong, but with the tax that all the people can use to do stuff into their parks, so that can't be used with those dollars.
It could be, but there's been a request to put it through this way in order to get it maybe faster than where we are with, it's ward capital that I think you've used before, but it's been asked if this is something that we could do as an improvement through ARPA funds.
Okay, and then I'm glad you clarified the plowing, because that would have me so confused. All I kept seeing is these big, huge trucks going down these little streets and people pinned in and can't get out of their street. So I'm glad you clarified that. Thank you so much. But the refuse pallet, now Brandy and I are looking at picking areas in my ward, because we're trying to change out to rollouts, and our challenge has been the streets are too narrow. And so that's what he's kind of working with me to see how we can find a street where the trucks can come down to do the rollout. So, and I'm glad that, we're looking at that. And I think the last thing, the sidewalks improvement, I know you all are trying to fix this, Nancy, but this is the biggest mess that I've ever seen. And then two, they keep saying, perfect example, they want to repair sidewalks on a block that has majority LRA properties. And they're saying, well, it's damage to the block, to the property, and they're vacant properties. But I guess my concern is, why would it have to come out of my ward capital to repair that?
So I don't know that.
Might not be it.
So I think there is different money for LRA sidewalks to be fixed. This is not, to the best of my knowledge, this is not that program. This is a program where the majority of people, we have 3,000, as of June 1st of 2022, we had 3,893 open service requests related to sidewalks.
Okay.
I guess, and I will verify this, is that this is based on houses that people actually, sidewalks in front of places where people live, or the majority of the street has livable housing in it, and the people have requested the sidewalk be fixed. I believe the LRA properties would be a different situation, and we will get you the answer on that. But this is, people have put in these requests, so I'm making an assumption that the residents, there are heavy amounts of residents in these areas.
Right, and so you and I are thinking alike, because I kept saying, I can't see, I'm paying for sidewalks in front of vacant lots or vacant properties and their LRA properties. I said, I can't see that. I said, if it's a resident resides in the property, I can see that, but not, I'm putting money in for these vacant properties. So we're kind of much on the same page. So any information you can give me will help me, because I was just frustrated with it.
Yeah, at some point, we may do some of that with LRA properties as a way to try to get them sold, but I will get you the information on this specific properties. I will send it, Paul, probably to you, and let people, I'll find out from Bethany whether there's a list that we can provide that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Or at least the
so much.
difference between LRA, but my sense is this, none of this is LRA properties. But at some point, as an attraction to try to sell some of those properties, we may have to do some things to help make them more attractive to be sold.
And I understand that. I just feel like, why would the older persons have to pay for it? And why wouldn't LRA absorb that cost? Because it's their properties.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you, Alderwoman Boyd, and thank you, Nancy, for going through those. Now, if I'm correct, it looks like that bottom half of this list, I don't see much overlap between our list and this list. I mean, maybe it's, I know it's had a couple things, but other than that, is that correct, Nancy?
Yes, I think we try to not have things be done. How we came about this list was there are residents that had filled out what they'd like to see money spent for, things we know we need to get done. And some of this is like, okay, sidewalks is a good example. We're fixing a backlog. Going forward, we'd have to figure that out. But these are things that we thought we would be able to use that amount of money before the end of December of 2024 and get caught up on all of that. So that's some of this, knowing that we have longer term capital issues as well. But these are things that residents would begin to see, citizens would begin to see as we're using the money in the neighborhoods to try and repair some of the things that lots of people have concerns and complaints about.
Thank you.
So to make a long story an epic, yes, we did not put them on both lists.
Okay, so other than those items that were in the top half that Rich talked about earlier. Okay, I think we're at the end of our meeting today. Obviously, and I was talking with Christina earlier about timing. What I'd like to do is we're probably going to have to shoot for a meeting in the week of the right after the first of the year, so that we can come together with some sort of recommended package. We'll follow up on what information we need today from Recreation on prioritizations, and I think that was the only one we had following up on. Rich, if we could get together, we're going to have some sort of summary, some sort of scenario we can start with, and just start looking at alternatives, so that we got some sort of package we can come up with. Again, we're talking about $27.5 million. And on the surplus side, and then whatever recommendations we're going to have for Latanya on the GO side, but the bill itself would be the 27.5 bill. So if just keep in mind, we probably reach out to you to get a meeting scheduled for that first week in January, so we can go over some potential scenarios. That would be great. And in the meantime, put on your thinking caps, because we got a lot of stuff out here that we need to fit into a rather smallish pot. Is there anything else that anyone else has today?
I may just not be recollecting, but in the first meeting, we went over a summary of the Citizen Advisory Committee results, right? Would it be possible to get the full detail? Because I think we had the top 10 and the bottom 10, but it'd be interesting to see where everything else fell.
You have the graphs on every project was listed. It's in there.
Okay.
You should have it.
I'll take another look at that. Thanks, Paul.
Okay. And if you need it like in a tabular form or something, let me know and I'll just send it. I think I could pull it together. But yeah, the whole thing was included.
One more note for clarification. So the comptroller's proposal is a proposal for the surplus.
Yeah, all of this, there's two things, no, the comptrollers, we got two potential pots of monies. Each year when there's an operating surplus, one half of that goes to capital, right? And that was about 27.5 million. Then there's also the GO bond issue that was authorized by voters last spring, which is going to be something in the neighborhood of 20. Typically it's we can make recommendations for what that should be funding. Typically it's the longer term things that are suitable for GO, like like bridges and things like that. That we can make a recommendation, but that's not going to be in the form of this bill. The bill itself would be the 27.5, keeping in mind that we know that we're going to be getting some funding from the GO. Does that make sense, Christina? Or I lose you?
Yeah, but I'm just I'm trying to understand that the proposal put forth by the comptroller's office.
For cars,
That's
a separate, that's just another item to consider for funding in whatever list we come up with.
in the surplus for the
Yes.
surplus.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think that would be a GO thing. No.
And that's not ranked within everything you guys presented.
Yeah, that would be, that wasn't in that original list. No.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a big juggling act, I think. And you're going to find that when we get to that, trying to get something balanced. All right. Is there anything else? Thank you all. And have a happy holiday, and we'll see you after the new year. Hopefully get it off to a good start. Thanks.
Happy
Happy holiday to everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Holidays.
Oh, I think people, I think they're done.